Hello friends, a relative newcomer to pickleball, Proton has been making a splash lately with buzz about their new paddle surface material that's smooth but gets great spin. Top pro Andre Diescu has been playing with the Proton for a while now, and they also recently signed Megan Dizon. So let's strip away some of the mystery behind Proton and break down all the performance metrics like spin, hand speed, control, power, and pop. I even cut one of these paddles open to figure out exactly what's going on under the surface. And at the end of the video, we'll see how everything comes together for gameplay. Okay, for this review, I'll touch on the entire Proton paddle line, which includes the Series 1, the ones with the new smooth, grippy surface. The Series 2 is an edgeless control paddle that plays a lot like the Selkirk Luxe. And the Series 3 is a thermoformed raw carbon fiber option. But I'll spend most of my time on the Series 1 paddles because they have some unique properties that deserve a closer look. The Series 1 comes in two shapes, wide body and elongated. And each of these shapes comes in two thickness options, 11 millimeter and 15 millimeter. The wide body measures 8¼ inches wide and 15.75 inches long with a 5¼ inch handle. The elongated version is 16.75 inches long by 7¼ inches wide, also with a 5¼ inch handle. Also, there are two subcategories of the Series 1, Type A and Type B. Type A has a polypropylene core and Type B uses a Nomex honeycomb core. I tested the 15 millimeter versions of the Type A and Type B. Both of these paddles are relatively heavy with a static weight of 8.4 ounces for the Type A wide body and 8.8 ounces for the Type B elongated. The swing weight of the Type A is 119, falling at the 69th percentile in my database. And the swing weight of the Type B comes in at 130, which is one of the heaviest swing weights in my database at the 97th percentile. So the Type A wide body's swing weight will feel like the Pickleball Apes Pro Line Energy S, Gearbox Pro Power Elongated, and the 11624 Hirachi X. The Type B elongated paddle's swing weight will feel like the Diadem Warrior, Sword and Shield J1H, and Hudef Viva Pro Gen 2. The Type A wide body has an impressive twist weight of 7.2, falling at the 95th percentile, and the Type B elongated twist weight is 6.55, falling at the 67th percentile. The twist weight correlates with the size of the sweet spot, and both of these paddles seem to have large sweet spots. I will say that the Type A wide body's sweet spot, while large, doesn't quite feel as large as the twist weight measurement indicates. For example, the twist weight on the Volair Mach 2 Forza feels slightly larger to me, even though these two paddles have nearly the same twist weight. I have a feeling the difference lies in the use of edge foam in the Forza, which the Proton doesn't have. Here's where things get really interesting with the Series 1 paddles. The surface of the paddle is completely smooth, but it feels tacky to the touch. It feels kind of like a ping pong paddle surface. It does feel a bit rubbery, but it's stiff, so it doesn't squish in like rubber. So this is an entirely new way to generate spin on the ball. Up to now, paddles have used texture to create ball spin. So either spray-on grit or a peel-ply texture known as raw carbon fiber. But the Proton Series 1 spins the ball by gripping it with what feels like a rubberized, smooth surface. But even though it feels grippy, it's hard enough to pass USAP regulations. And speaking of the USAP regulations, most of us are familiar with the roughness testing that they test with the Starrett machine. But a much lesser known rule is that they also have a limit on friction, which directly applies to the nanotech surface of the Proton paddles. They use another machine to measure the coefficient of friction, and the Proton Series 1 is right up against the limit of how tacky a paddle surface can be. I think one of the exciting things about this surface is that it won't wear down at least the same way as textured surfaces do. Grit and raw carbon fiber always wear down as the ball damages the surface, smoothing it down and reducing its spin potential. But the Proton surface is already smooth and it spins the ball because of its tackiness. So there's no texture to wear down. And I don't expect the paddle will lose its spin potential nearly as quickly as other paddles. I mean, I suppose it's possible that eventually the ball would wear through the nanotech layer, but you have to imagine that would take a long time. And honestly, I don't know the physical properties of this nanotech material yet, so maybe its tackiness degrades over time or something like that. But Proton has been using it on their softball bats for years now with good results. So right now, this seems like a very promising innovation and pedal technology that could provide long-lasting spin. I'll talk about the spin numbers later, but for now, just know that they are very good. Let's move on to what's underneath this grippy surface layer. They're using carbon fiber layers in a layup that seems to be the same as most other carbon fiber paddles. But an important thing to note here is that Proton claims to use American-sourced aerospace-grade carbon fiber. Now, in my experience, nothing sets off paddle manufacturers more than the grade and the classification of carbon fiber. I get an earful every time I talk to different companies. I've heard that no companies are actually using Toray carbon fiber. They're just calling it that. Same with T700. I've also heard that no companies are using aerospace-grade carbon fiber, but instead it's sports grade, which basically means it's the rejects from the aerospace industry. I did have a long conversation with Charles, the owner of Proton, and there does seem to be some credibility in his claims about the grade of carbon fiber. In his past life, he was a VP in the aerospace industry, and according to him, the carbon fiber used in Proton paddles is the same as what's used in aircraft at companies like Lockheed Martin and Boeing, where he still has many contacts. He's also manufacturing his paddles here in the USA and will soon open a factory in Mexico to scale up production. All of this got me very curious about what's going on under the surface of the paddle, so I dissected the Type B Nomex paddle. You can see right away the Nomex honeycomb core, which has very small cell sizes compared to the traditional polypropylene cells. This probably explains the extra weight of the paddle because the core is denser. The same probably goes for the Type A polypropylene paddle, although I did not dissect that paddle. The owner tells me that the center of the core around the sweet spot on the Type A uses a small cell honeycomb, and it changes to a standard cell honeycomb around the edges. Another interesting thing about this paddle is that it seems to have been manufactured with a hybrid of traditional cold layering and thermoforming. There's no edge foam, and the honeycomb core is exposed along the edges and places, but then there's a carbon seam along the neck extending into the handle. So it's not entirely unibody, but it's also not entirely cold layered. The owner of Proton told me that the carbon fiber seam wasn't carried all the way up to the paddle's perimeter to allow flex points along the neck to provide more responsiveness and dwell time. Under a microscope, you can see the nanotech surface layer over at least 2 layers of carbon fiber. Here's the nanotech layer being peeled back with an X-Acto knife. I was able to confirm that the carbon fiber is laid up with unidirectional prepreg sheets. I can see at least 2 sheets of unidirectional carbon fiber arranged at 90 degrees to each other. But something different's going on here because the profile of the cut doesn't quite look like other carbon fiber paddles I've dissected. Usually it's easy to see how many layers there are, and there's a clear boundary between the carbon fiber layers and the core. But you can see here that the carbon fiber layers seem to undulate with the core cells. I can definitely see 2 layers, but it's possible there's a third that I'm not seeing in the cut. The owner of Proton did share with me that they're using what's called a ruggedized resin in their prepreg. This type of resin actually has Kevlar in it, so it's supposed to be much more durable and reduce the risk of core corruption and delamination. The nanotech layer is clearly visible in the profile, sitting right on top of the carbon fiber. Here's a dime to get a perspective of scale. From this microscopic image, I calculated that the thickness of the nanotech layer is about 1/14 of a dime's thickness, which means it's about 100 micrometers thick, or 0.1 millimeters. So basically, it's the same thickness as a sheet of paper. And I don't know enough about this nanotech material to say whether or not it will eventually wear through after striking a hard plastic ball for thousands of times. Time will tell, but I have a fair amount of confidence that it will retain its spin potential longer than the current reigning champion, that being raw carbon fiber. I did speak with Proton-sponsored pros Andre Daescu and Megan Dizon, who both use the Series 1 paddles, and they told me that they both have been using these same paddles for months, which was pretty shocking to me since most pros switch out paddles every tournament or even every few games during a tournament. If you want to see this full interview, you can check out my upcoming podcast. I'll post a link in the description when it comes out. Okay, first things first, let's talk about spin. Can a paddle with no texture get good spin? My spin test for the Series 1B averaged 2,336 RPM, and the Type A wasn't far behind at 2,276. This places these paddles in the upper end of the top tier category. In fact, there's only one paddle that got more spin than the Type B, and that's the Volair Mach 2, which only got a few RPMs higher at 2345. I will say that temperature does seem to have an effect on the spin capabilities of these Proton paddles. My first spin tests came in around 2100 RPM, but temperatures when I took those tests were in the 30s, so I retested when temperatures were in the 50s, and both paddles got a 200 RPM bump in spin. So cold temperatures seem to stiffen up the nanotech surface, causing it to grip the ball less. But this does make me curious about what kind of spin this paddle will get in warmer temperatures during the summer. Average serve speed measured 54.8 miles per hour for the Type A and 56.1 miles per hour for the Type B. This puts the power ratings for these paddles at the 64th and 92nd percentiles. So the Type A wide body has above average power, and the Type B elongated has exceptional power. Pop ratings as measured with punch volley speed are lower, falling at the 15th percentile for the Type A and the 40th percentile for the Type B. I think this mostly has to do with the higher swing weights for both paddles, making it more difficult to quickly accelerate the paddle from a dead stop. What all this means is that the Series 1 paddles put a lot of velocity on the ball with full swings like serves, drives from the baseline, and overhead putaways, but shorter strokes like dinks, punch volleys, and flicks don't come off with as much velocity as paddles with more pop. The Series 1 paddles definitely take some adjustment because there's really nothing else quite like them out there right now. They have non-standard dimensions and they're using new materials. These differences are subtle, but they add up to make the paddle feel a bit unfamiliar the first time you hit with it. I came away from the first play session with the Series 1 paddles not quite knowing what I thought about them, but each play session since, I've begun to like these paddles more and more. My favorite right now is the wide-body Series 1 Type A, which is the polypropylene one. The Type B Nomex core is just a bit too brittle for my taste. There's also a noticeable break-in period with these paddles where the performance improves. I think the core loosens up a bit and the nanotech surface also becomes grippier. I noticed the ball coming off hotter and dipping harder after about 6 to 10 hours of court time. The biggest standout features of this paddle you'll notice right away are the spin it generates and the soft feel of the paddle face. I mean, it's soft to the touch, but you'll also notice a difference when hitting the ball. Traditional paddles have a crisper feel off the face, but the nanotech surface on the Proton mutes the ball response, kind of acting like a thin pad between the ball and the core. The core actually feels stiff, as expected with a thinner, high-density core. So in this way, it does remind me of the feel of a table tennis or ping pong paddle, where you have rubber over a solid core. I'd call the Series 1 wide body an all-court paddle and the elongated Series 1 a power paddle. With the Series 1 wide body, you get good power from the baseline with full swings and good control through the transition zone and kitchen with resets and drops. The trade-off here is that it gets below average pop, so speed-ups and counterattacks at the kitchen aren't this paddle's strength. Although I did not test the thinner 11mm paddle, it almost certainly gets more pop, but it likely also has less power than the 15mm. So again, trade-offs. No paddle will be amazing at everything, and you have to choose what elements of a paddle best fit your play style. Definitely my favorite thing about this paddle is all the shape it puts on the ball with all the spin it generates. My spin tests place it at the top of the top tier category, but there's something about the mechanics of this paddle that make the ball dip harder with top spin than other paddles with similar spin test results. A few of my passing shots from the baseline nearly landed in the kitchen because all the shape from the top spin. And I often noticed my serves bouncing up to about chest level without even trying to hit a necessarily hard or aggressive serve. There's also a more subtle difference with how the nanotech surface grips the ball compared to grit or raw carbon fiber. There's definitely more responsiveness across the full spectrum of swing paths, from soft dinks and short flicks to roll volleys and fuller swings like serves and drives. This helps with control aspects across all of the game, and it provides more offensive tools because you can be more aggressive with everything from serves to dinks. You probably already know that I'm a big fan of technological innovation that pushes the envelope in terms of paddle performance. So I have to say that I'm impressed with the Proton Series 1 paddles and how Proton is doing things their own way. They're using completely new materials and using their own manufacturing techniques that aren't quite thermoforming and not quite traditional cold layering either. And the measurements of the paddle in terms of overall length and width, handle length and thickness are completely non-traditional in the paddle space. In this way, Proton reminds me a bit of Gearbox. Both companies have a tech-forward, progressive mindset, and they do things their own way. I do think the Series 1 paddles are great, but they're probably not for everyone. I think the main thing that might be a turnoff to some people is that these paddles are weighted heavier than most other with similar shapes. Most pros do play with similar swing weights to the Proton Series 1 paddles, or even heavier, but not everyone in the amateur ranks wants a heavier paddle. That being said, the swing weight of the Series 1 wide body is 119, which falls again at the 69th percentile in my database, so it's slightly above average, but nothing too outrageous. But I do think that these paddles will be appealing to a lot of people because of the elite spin that's generated from an entirely new technology that probably won't degrade as quickly as most of the other paddles on the market right now. The nanotech surface grabs the ball and spins it without any texture, so there won't be the usual flattening or wearing down of the peel ply embossing or the grit that reduces the paddle's spin potential. As I mentioned earlier, the nanotech layer will, of course, eventually wear out, but all signs point to the fact that it'll take longer for this paddle to lose its spin than any other option currently on the market. If I had to take a guess, I'd say probably on the order of a year or more, rather than a few weeks or months. And Proton actually does provide a lifetime warranty on the surface of their Series 1 paddles, which makes me think that they do trust their products. And they had a long history of using the same nanotech surface on their softball bats, so if there were any durability issues, they probably would have been realized by now. All that being said, these paddles come with a premium price tag. At $280, they're some of the most expensive paddles on the market. They do offer a generous 20% discount with my code JohnQ, bringing the price down to $224 before taxes and shipping. So that brings the price down to the same range as a lot of other premium paddles. And I think that's fair for the level of quality and innovation that went into the Series 1. I do have a wish list for these paddles. First, I'd love to see different graphics. Of course, it's entirely subjective, but I don't care for the graphics or the color schemes for any of the Series 1 paddles. And none of my other friends were a fan of the graphics either. I mean, I get it, it's a retro look, some people are gonna like it, but the majority of people I've talked to don't. But one of the cool things about the nanotech surface is that you have a lot more creative options in terms of graphic design than you do with raw carbon fiber, because you're not having to put the graphics over a textured surface, and you can do fills instead of just lines. Secondly, I think that a lightweight option would go over well. Granted, the weight of these paddles probably comes from higher quality raw materials and QASUs to prevent breakage, like more epoxy and denser cores. But if there's a way to bring the swing weight down to the 100 to 110 range for the wide body, I think this would be appealing to more players who either prefer lightweight paddles or who like to have the option to customize their paddle with lead tape. And lastly, if these paddles had edge foam, I think they'd have some of the largest sweet spots on the market. The sweet spot on these paddles is already large, but I think that the combination of the edge foam and the softer feel of the nanotech surface would really feel great to hit with. Okay, and the last thing I wanted to talk about are the other paddles in the Proton lineup. The Series 2 is a softer, control-oriented, elongated paddle that plays a lot like the Selkirk Luxe. Similar to the Luxe, it has a grit texture, so it doesn't use that nanotech coating as seen in the Series 1. So you're likely to get similar wear of the texture as other grit paddles, and the spin won't last as long as the Series 1. I got 1800 RPM on my spin tests, placing the Series 2 in the high spin category. Compared to the Luxe, the Series 2 does get more power and pop, falling at the 31st and 48th percentiles in these categories versus the Luxe, which falls at the 5th and 11th percentiles. Don't get me wrong, this is still very much a control paddle, but it's a little more lively than the Luxe. The sweet spot on the Series 2 actually does feel larger than what you feel on the Luxe, probably because there's not a big hole in the paddle face. And I do like the graphics on the Series 2 much better than the Series 1. The Series 3 is a thermoformed raw carbon fiber paddle. It feels very familiar to us who've played with Gen 2 paddles for the past year now. My spin test results came in at 1755 RPM, placing this paddle in the high spin category. Being a raw carbon fiber paddle, the texture is created with a peel ply sheet that leaves an epoxy-infused embossing on the surface. So again, this paddle does not have the nanotech coating as seen on the Series 1, so its texture and spin potential is likely to wear down faster than what you see on the Series 1, probably at about the same rate as other raw carbon fiber paddles. I did enjoy playing with this paddle. It has a swing weight of 123, which is in the typical range for elongated paddles, and the sweet spot felt very good, as reflected in the twist weight of 6.72. I did notice a good amount of power on full strokes from the baseline, and it got a high power rating in my testing, falling at the 92nd percentile. Its pop is more muted, falling at the 26th percentile. So if you're a fan of the Carbon 1X and other similar shaped thermoformed paddles, the Proton Series 2 is worth considering. The Series 2 and 3 paddles are more moderately priced, although they still fall within that premium price range. The Series 2 retails for $220 and the Series 3 is $240. And using the code JohnQ will again knock 20% off the price, bringing both paddles to under $200. As always, thank you for watching, and your likes and comments actually always do help out this channel. And if you want to see my top ranked paddles in 6 categories, check out my 2-part series here and here. And if you haven't seen it yet, I started a website and put all of my paddle metrics on a database that you can sort and search. There's also a ball database that compares the hardness, rebound, and other metrics for most of the ball brands out there, including the new Vulcan PPA tournament ball. And you can subscribe to my newsletter and get early access information and some behind-the-scenes stuff. You can check all of that out at johnqpickleball.com.